Hi, my name's Jeff, and I'm going to give you a quick tour around my wildlife garden here in Surrey in the UK. I'm a professional jobbing gardener, but I also do this for a hobby as well. So this is a working garden. Right now we're on the first week in June, and a lot of plants which I've been growing for customers' gardens have all gone out now, so there's actually not too much left on my plant benches and in the greenhouse. But otherwise, everything I'm about to talk to you about is a garden where there is no chemicals used at all, and everything is planted primarily with the intention of attracting bees, other pollinating insects. There's a few plants in here. There's a few, my wife likes to grow hostas, and there's a few Japanese maples down in pots. But I'm at the stage now of trying to utilise every single space. This is a small, relatively small garden behind a typical semi-detached here in the UK. It's 75 feet long by 30 wide, which I think is 20 metres by 6.5, 7 metres wide. So I'll give you a quick tour now of what I like to grow. And to say, there's some nice hostas. But I'll give you a quick tour around the pots, and on the top there is chamomile. There's not a lot in flower yet. This is a bit early in the summer. They call it the June gap here in the UK, so plenty of early spring plants have all gone over now. This is catmint, Nepeta 6 Hills Giant. Got quite a few young dahlias waiting to come through. A really good little herbie called Calaminta Nepeta. It's a variety called Blue Pearl, which I first saw up at Beth Chatto's gardens, and I've adopted. Purple osteospermums, fuchsias, Cerinthe Pereum, I think it is, and Gaillardias, lavender, more dahlias, and just over here on the other side, that's ragged robin, which I grow in pots. Does really well if you keep it wet all year, and I've got a whole stack of these. This whole plant stager is full of ragged robin. We just moved those today, and they've been replaced with the summer plants as Salvia and Nemorosa caradonna. And I also like to grow a lot of agastache. I think they're called Mexican hyssop, but these are a couple of varieties called blue licorice, and I think the one with the slightly redder foliage is Astello indigo. Down here there is, I forgot what that was actually. There's some herbs I planted last week. I'll have to look at the label. And also blueberries in pots. Actually, I've just remembered that's hyssop. That's the first year. I've had dabbled with that in the past, but it's really good for bees. There's a normal purple sage there. But yeah, if you're going to grow anything in pots in a garden, blueberries, they do the three main things you want from a wildlife garden. You get lots of pollen for the bees, lots of berries for the birds, and it also gets a really gorgeous red foliage in the autumn. Can't ask much more from a plant. There's another trough of Calaminta Nepeta. And then we'll take you for a quick tour down the garden. As I said, this is a relatively small garden here, and I mean, I work in about 21 different gardens now. This isn't the smallest that I visit, but it's a normal garden from behind a UK semi. More in pots here, Nepeta sibirica. That's a yellow anthimis, great for solitary bees. Chocolate cosmos. Had that in a pot, that same plant, for about 15 years. Just goes, you put it away in the greenhouse, no water by about October. Start watering in March, and here we are in June. It's just about to start flowering. Dahlia, Bishop's Children. Any dahlias, if not the big cactus flowered ones, but the ones with single flowers, they're all great for bees. And further over in troughs there is an inula just coming to flower. I've never known the variety of that. I've done a lot of research and I'm unable to find it. Just came out of one of my customers' gardens a few years back. And there's some small salvias, bit of bedding. There's a globe artichoke. Lesser knapweed, we'll talk more about that later. There's fleabane, bird's foot trefoil. I like to make use of these old plastic hanging baskets. You find loads of them in customers' gardens, chucked behind sheds and down side alleys. Once they've been used, they get thrown away. More young plants, all good for bees. Delphiniums, aquilesias, foxgloves. I've got lots of foxgloves. There's my ragged robins, just been put to, they'll sit there all year probably, till next spring. A couple of acers. Helenium, that's a great bee plant. Got a nice, I say nice, a lovely example of a step over apple, but unfortunately it just doesn't set fruit very well. It's probably been there about 7 years. Flowers beautifully. I don't know what's having, but there's not a setting because we've got crabapples and other apple trees around here, so they really should set. I think there were about 40 flowers on it this spring, and I can only find 3 forming apples. This is a little spring bed that would have been completely covered in forget-me-nots till a couple of weeks ago. Pulmonarias, foxgloves, Heuchera. Heuchera, good foliage plant, which everybody loves this day and age, but also has small little nondescript flowers, but they're really good for bees. And I think that one's probably a Heucherella. Bed here of a new, these are called Patio Raspberries. Actually going in pots, but I just put them in the ground. And we start to get a bit more densely planted here. There is, if the sun doesn't get in our eyes, a very large wild cherry tree here. It's about 30 feet tall, about a foot across at the base, and it was a wee little sapling when we moved here in 1993. As I said before, no chemicals used in this garden, a tiny little bit of glyphosate before I knew any better, when we had quite a lot of bindweed when we first started in this garden. And now I just pick it, you keep picking it and pulling it, and eventually it goes away. The shrubs which are all here primarily for the pollen in the spring. I've got quite a few red currants. I just leave the berries for the birds either side of the footpath here. There's a weeping crabapple. Just come down, we're about halfway down the garden now. This is my wild pond, and it is pretty overgrown. It's probably about 12 feet by 4, but the open water now is much reduced. It's been here like this since 1993. No fish, just here for the benefit of, we get tadpoles every spring. It's probably a healthy newt population which probably decimates them. But and I know it's a favoured watering hole for the local badgers. We back onto a railway here, and we are lucky we have visiting badgers, plenty of foxes around here. We used to get deer until National Rail were forced to fence off all their rail boundaries, which is probably not a bad thing in terms of getting deer coming in and eat all your plants. Healthy hedgehog population, despite all the news. Don't often see them, but I eventually bought one of those nighttime trap cameras, and there are, they're quite hard to identify individually, but at least 5 or 6 individuals last summer across a little footbridge here. And then it gets a bit more shrubby. This is just normal privet. That was actually self-sown, just turned up from the birds. Centre bed here, this is in the spring, this would be full of native daffodils. I started off with 20 bulbs in 1990, I think the spring of 94, and I think we get around 380 blooms now. I sit here with a piece of tracing paper and count them every spring. Full of meadowsweet, it's a good wildflower. Nice, there's a little bit more here than I probably usually allow. Full of red campion, there's geranium phaeum, hedge woundwort, I'll show you a close up on that in a minute. There's a Strantia major, and a couple of shrubs in the middle. There's hazel here which we coppice, and this is a Guelder rose. And on this side there's a viburnum. I've forgotten the variety, but I did plant that. This used to be pretty solidly overgrown, and we cut it all back down to the ground, started from scratch about 10 years ago. As you can see, this I'm lucky, both sides, you'll see later, I've got, or with permission, I've got neighbours who've allowed me to have a open trellis rather than just having a sort of solid fence which blocks out all the light. This piece is just been replaced, got new neighbours, and otherwise it's here we've got cotoneasters, some pyracantha at the back there. So the viburnum on the ground. There is Persicarius superbum, ferns. This part of the garden is pretty undisturbed. We weed the path here, and but otherwise it's really left to get on with its own. It's a high maintenance garden, but only a couple of times a year. There's a couple more red currants. Here is hedge woundwort. I've forgotten the Latin name, but it's very highly regarded as a great source of pollen for wild solitary bees. And there's the odd nettle, don't mind, as long as it's not stinging me. Geranium phaeum. This hedgerow at the back here was probably planted in 1995, with the typical mix they recommend. There's dogwood, native privet, spindle, hawthorn, blackthorn. There's an elderflower just coming over from the railway embankment, and again in the centre there's a good mixture of plants in here. There's white dead nettle and more campion, perennial foxgloves. This is Digitalis lutea. More red campion. There's quite a few wild geraniums. Brunnera. That's actually not a bee plant. It's just some nice foliage. Lots of wild strawberries down the ground, and all the sorts of things that they recommend in the wildlife gardening books. Little bits. There's little stacks of plant stems at the back of the border, and logs just let to rot down. I mean, there's a little stack of logs there completely covered in ivy now. That was about 3 foot tall 10 years ago. It's just completely rotted down. As you can see, it's quite dark at the back here, but the railway company, National Rail, do occasionally clear this embankment, so sometimes you can't see the trains, and for the last couple of years you can. But that's a little bit more lighting, allows me to change what I do in the garden. Hazel, that's getting coppiced down. They're quite, you can see they're probably only about a year, 2 years old, those stems. The working bones of any good organic wildlife friendly garden is the composting area. I make a lot of compost, not so much for this garden nowadays, but I tend to take it out to customers' gardens, just improving some of their gardens when I need to. As you can see, mostly plastic bins here, and quite a large bay at the back, which is where it all starts off. And then after a while it ends up looking something like that, and I'll probably sieve that out. And lastly, there's what I call a wildlife bin. This is just an open cage. They're quite cheap to buy actually. That's just filled with perennial stems and perennial grasses that I grow, topped off with a piece of corrugated sheet metal. And that's in the mornings when the sun's out. That's where the slow worms tend to congregate. They come to get the warmth. And there's a nice one of these expensive New Zealand bins here, and there was a adult grass snake in there last summer, which we have had grass snakes here before, but I was hoping it was a female. She was laying eggs, but I never saw any evidence that happened. And then just back through the woodland, it's all ferns, and on the ground here that's wood sorrel. There's more geraniums, leaf mould bin with stacks of logs underneath, and this white flower here, this shrub is a Deutzia, and it's fantastic for bees. I don't think there's been that many bees around this spring. I really don't think it has been a poor spring. This is usually alive, and I cannot barely hear. This is in full flower now. And the other thing that's gone over here, which might have been a mistake to introduce, but we manage it, is wild garlic. And as you can see, that's just all flopped over now. On this bit of the bed, there's a couple of ferns. I'll just let it manage itself. Just coming here, this stem here is a large wild crabapple, which I planted at the same time as the hedge. That just came in the collection and planted it here. And then there's a number, I think I've got 3 different Amelanchias in this property. There's one out in the front garden. This is Amelanchia ornifolia, which you can see just disappearing up about 15 feet tall now. That's been there about 8 years, probably a bit more. And further down the garden is Amelanchier, I think that's Canadensis, which will turn into quite a nice sized shrub. That's the main flower border, which is probably, I don't know, 40, 35 feet by about 6 foot deep at the deepest. And set everything in this bed. This is, as I probably said earlier, this is the June gap, so everything's just, a lot of stuff's just gone over. Just waiting for the summer planting to come in now. Lots of comfrey, great for the bees in the spring. There's buttercups in there which are now. And a good mixture of general bee attracting plants. There's betony and more knapweed, Veronica spicata, globe thistles, echinops, persicaria. There's geranium Johnson's blue, Thalictrum, eupatorium, that's the American eupatorium, Joe Pyeweed, gets to about 7-8 feet tall, gorgeous red flowers, lots of bees, quite a few butterflies. Not a great butterfly garden here, I must admit. There's persicaria, more lesser knapweed, that's Centaurea nigra, that's a wild meadow wildflower. I'll show you a bit more of that in a minute. And that's Veronica longifloria. There's aconitum, just proving that white-tailed bumblebees love that. There's a couple of different Veronicastrums, more betony. I think it's wood betony. That's a wildflower herb here in the UK, and it's great for attracting wool carder bees. That's a really nice, one of our largest solitary bees. And just a little bit more. There's golden marjoram, there's geranium Roxanne, and there's a lovely wild species rose there. Hemeroculus daylily, just about to come into flower. That's actually here because it looks nice, not because it attracts bees. It's quite unusual in my garden. More Heuchera, more betony. There's scabious, a bit like devil's bit scabious. Roses, geraniums. That's geranium Fian again. Yellow loosestrife. And there's a nice feature, silver birch, that's quite new. And as you can see, with this quite new fencing on our new neighbours, and the last sort of 6 months or so I've been making an effort to get some wire mesh up on every single available vertical surface. As I say, it's quite a small garden. I've been here a long time now and I've run out of space. And lastly, the main centre bed. This would have been a play area when my daughter was younger. Been dug up. There's two 6 foot by 6 foot square, 2 metre by 2 metre square beds. Vegetable garden early on, and then I've been experimenting. It's not looking great, man. The alliums have just gone over. Started off with about 75 allium purple sensation. There's about 200 here now. And then the smaller seed heads, or flower heads, sorry, that's little ones there. That's allium spherocephalum. I think they call them drumstick alliums now. They've had to finally give it a decent English name. This has been an experiment in terms of trying to grow plants which don't do well on my heavy clay soil. Things like salvias, like the ones I grow in pots, echinaceas, and because I don't use any chemicals, you do get, I can show you a nice bit of slug damage on an echinacea. So, it will still flower, but not great. So what I'm doing with this bed is converting it over to just a bed for primarily lesser knapweed, as you saw in the meadow and also in the flower beds. So they've all been grown from seed, and I think there's about 15 in here. So next year this will just be dominated by that. It's great for bees, and it attracts a lot of goldfinches like the seed heads, so that will just be allowed to do its own thing. And one of the prime things, when people ask you why you're a wildlife gardener, what do you do different? I mean, it's quite fashionable now for people to say, all of this flower bed, as you can see, it's high maintenance, but for me, only twice a year. It'll take me a couple of hours in February, March, to get it all clean. This is full of tulips in the spring. But this will be bare soil all through the winter. You know, there's only a few shrubs here. There's not much substance to this border. I don't need it because I've got the backing onto the railway. I've got the big shrubs and the trees, which if you're, you know, lucky enough to live in this part of Surrey. This is near junction 9 on the M25, and if the wind's blowing one way you can hear the M25, and if it's blowing the other way you can hear the cows mooing in the field. It's about 200 yards away, as long as they don't build houses on it. And the sun is just starting to go around the corner of houses there. So, hope you enjoyed the little tour. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask. If I didn't say at the start, I am a professional jobbing gardener and I like to do this sort of thing in other people's gardens too. So sometimes it's a bit of an effort to do it in your own garden. You know what they say about builders. But I enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this little tour. Thanks.